Hi, my name is Maris Vega, and I think my mother always planned to erase me. She didn't scream. She didn't hit. No, it was quieter than that. She called it a walk to clear the air, but by the time I realized what she meant, I was already 30 miles deep in Idaho forest, kneeling in the snow, hearing her say, "Go meet the wolves, useless." She turned. She left. And somehow, that wasn't the worst thing she did. How did a mother end up plotting with my sister to leave me for dead, cut me out of our family's legacy, and convince the world I never existed? You ever wonder what betrayal sounds like when it's whispered, not shouted? Because I recorded it, and I survived it. And this is the story they never wanted you to hear. The first thing I noticed when I walked into the country club banquet room was the floral centerpiece. Not the guests, not the band playing soft instrumental jazz, not even the smell of smoked brisket or frosted cupcakes. No. It was the way the lilies drooped slightly under the weight of Vera Callan's over-decorated sense of importance. My mother's birthday always felt more like a community gala than a family gathering. I stood at the entrance longer than I should have, watching everyone mingle. Celine was already posing for photos with a few of her podcast fans near the cake table. Of course she was. My older sister had always known how to shine in any light, especially the spotlight she helped build for herself. Me? I was more of a shadow in her glow, one my mother didn't even try to step into. As I made my way to the long table, I scanned the place cards, each name written in perfect gold cursive, tucked into crystal holders like miniature trophies. Uncle Harold, Aunt Janine, Cousin Natalie. And then, nothing. There wasn't one for me. I paused, fingers brushing over the glossy linen, trying not to let it show. My mother glanced over, wine in hand, and gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Oh, honey," she said like she was correcting a child. "They must have forgotten one. Just sit at the end. The end." Next to the buffet line, near where servers bustled in and out with trays of appetizers, I didn't argue. I didn't roll my eyes or demand an explanation. I just sat down. I was always good at that, sitting down, staying quiet. Dinner moved forward like any other performance. Toasts were made. Stories were retold. Laughter flowed as easily as the wine, and I played my part like I always had, smiling when expected, nodding on cue. Then, an older cousin stood and raised her glass. "To Vera, the matriarch of this beautiful family. Look at the daughters she raised, so poised, so accomplished." Someone in the crowd added, "Especially Celine, she's just magnetic." My mother chuckled. "Oh yes, Celine's always been my crown jewel." She paused just long enough to sip from her flute before glancing down the table toward me. "And Maris? Well, she was a little surprised, weren't you?" The way her voice danced on the word surprise made it feel like a stain I couldn't scrub off. "She was our little oops," Vera laughed. The room chuckled with her. I felt every set of eyes flicker toward me, some pitying, some amused. I didn't say anything. My throat had tightened just enough to make swallowing feel like a betrayal. So I focused on the candle in front of me, the way its flame flickered slightly from someone's breath nearby. After the toasts, the cake came. It was 3 tiers, covered in fondant roses. Celine cut it while someone recorded her for her Instagram story. The plates were passed down. Mine came last, the only one without a name, piped in icing. I stared at the blank surface for a beat too long. A young niece leaned over and whispered, "Why doesn't Grandma ever hug you like she does Aunt Celine?" I gave her a smile I hoped looked like it meant nothing. "Some people just show love differently," I said, even though deep down, I didn't believe that anymore. Celine posted the family photo later that night. I know, because I saw it when I got home. She stood next to Vera, both glowing in the warm lights of the banquet hall. The caption read, "So grateful for my roots." I wasn't in the picture. It wasn't even that I'd been standing behind someone. I remembered clearly. I had stood beside Aunt Janine. I had smiled, but I was cropped out, completely. I left the party earlier than most. I stepped outside without saying goodbye, slipping through the side door and walking toward the lake that bordered the back of the property. The moon was hanging low, reflected in still water that didn't seem bothered by the chill. I wasn't cold either. Or if I was, I didn't notice. My heels sank slightly into the soft ground as I wandered closer to the edge. I thought about how easy it would be to disappear here. Not in some dramatic way, just fade. Stop fighting to be noticed, to matter. Would anyone in that room even realize if I vanished? Would they remember I was here? Or would they say I'd been too busy to come? The wind blew against my cheek like an answer. Then I heard it. My mother's voice from the balcony. I turned slowly to see her silhouette against the light, wine glass still in hand. "Maris," she called. "Don't be dramatic. Come back in and help clean up. You're good at that." That was the line that did it. Not the toast, not the blank cake, not the cropped-out photo or the lack of a seat. That line, that summoning, like I was the maid at a wedding, not her daughter. I turned back to the lake, but not for long. My feet carried me to my car. I drove home without turning the radio on, and that was the night I realized maybe she never loved me at all. Maybe I was always just a placeholder. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, my body still and my mind racing like a machine without brakes. Around 4 in the morning, I gave up pretending to rest and made myself a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, just bitterness to match the ache in my chest. When the sky turned from black to bruised gray, I pulled the curtains aside. Downtown Coeur d'Alene was quiet. From my small apartment above the laundromat, I could see the bakery down the block flipping its sign from closed to open. It was just another day for everyone else. I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. Celine's face filled the screen. A new post, one of the professional shots from Mom's party. She was standing beside the cake, a champagne glass in hand, Vera beaming next to her. The caption read, "Honoring the woman who taught me what real strength looks like. Love you, Mom." There were hundreds of likes already, dozens of comments from clients, fans, and neighbors. One read, "Two powerful women, so lucky to have each other." I closed the app without liking it. By mid-morning, I had put on jeans and a sweater, grabbed my laptop, and was halfway through replying to a freelance job request when my phone buzzed. Vera. I hesitated. She never called without a reason. I answered. "Morning, sweetheart," she said with a sugar-coated tone. "I hate to bother you, but we need your help with some paperwork. It's just a small thing for the shop taxes. Can you swing by later?" "What kind of paperwork?" I asked, not hiding the edge in my voice. "It's just a signature," she replied breezily. "Nothing you need to worry about. Celine will be there to walk you through it. You're technically still part of the business on paper, and it's year-end stuff. Boring, really." I should have asked more. I should have insisted on seeing everything first. But I didn't. I wanted so badly, so pathetically, for there to be some attempt at reconciliation. By noon, I was sitting at the floral shop office with Celine. She greeted me with a bright smile, like we hadn't just spent the last family event pretending I didn't exist. "Thanks for coming," she chirped, sliding a folder across the desk. "Here's the form. Just sign there at the bottom." "What is this exactly?" I asked. She waved it off. "It's just a formality. End-of-year liability consolidation. We've restructured a few things under Mom's name. You know how accounting is." I skimmed the first page. It looked dense and filled with jargon I didn't have the energy to decode. I signed. 3 days later, I got a call from the bank. "Hi, is this Ms. Vega?" "Yes," I replied. "This is Michelle with First Idaho Credit Union. I'm calling to confirm a co-signed liability adjustment connected to Callan Floral Holdings. We noticed your signature on a $120,000 consolidation loan, and we need to verify your contact information." I froze. "There must be some mistake," I said. "I didn't co-sign any loan." The woman was patient, but firm. "Your signature is on the legal document. It was finalized earlier this week." After I hung up, I tried calling Celine. She didn't answer. I called Vera. She picked up after 2 rings. "Maris," she said, not even trying to sound concerned. "Did you put my name on a 6-figure loan?" "I didn't put it there. You did," she replied coolly. "I thought it was a tax form." "You're 33 years old, Maris. At some point, you need to be responsible for the role you play in this family." The words hit harder than I expected. You tricked me. You helped us, she corrected. And for once, you did something that actually mattered. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, heart pounding. You signed me into debt. You're part of this family. Families share responsibility. But not inheritance, right? I said before I could stop myself. She went quiet. Later that week, I stopped by Aunt Lydia's house to drop off a set of old recipe cards I'd digitized for her. While sipping her too-sweet tea, she mentioned casually, "Your mom finally redid the family trust. Good thing Celine's name is all over it. That girl is the legacy." I blinked. What do you mean? Oh, Lydia said, realizing she'd said too much. I just assumed you knew. I didn't, but I wasn't surprised. That evening, I drove to my mother's house. She answered the door like she'd been expecting me. I want to see the trust documents, I said. She didn't flinch. Why? Because I'm your daughter. She stepped aside, letting me in. The living room still smelled like lavender and lies. Vera opened the filing cabinet, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me like she was passing me a napkin. I flipped through the pages. Celine's name was there in bold. My name? Not a single mention, not even in the footnotes. You always had less responsibility, Vera said, pouring herself a glass of Merlot. Less involvement. Less contribution. And so I get nothing? You always needed less. I left without slamming the door. I didn't give her that satisfaction. Back in my car, I sat behind the wheel, staring at the house that looked like home but had never really been mine. I was erased. Not by accident, but by design. That's when I started writing everything down. Dates, documents, their voices. Because if I was going to be erased, I'd leave behind evidence of the crime. I didn't start journaling out of some grand plan. It wasn't a revenge plot. It was survival. A way to keep track of what was happening to me in a life that never felt like mine. I kept a yellow legal pad next to my bed, and each morning I wrote down conversations, dates, odd comments, everything that made me pause, no matter how small. It was the first time in years I started documenting the reality of how I was being treated. Not as a daughter, not even as a person, just a placeholder, a name to sign, a loose end to tie off. The days blurred together. I buried myself in my freelance tech gigs, taking on more work than I could realistically handle. Clients kept coming, deadlines kept tightening, and I convinced myself that staying busy meant staying sane. But under the surface, something was splintering. I was eating less, sleeping worse, checking the locks 3 times before bed. Like a switch inside me had quietly flipped to permanent alert mode. It all came to a head on a Thursday morning. I'd been up all night debugging a server for a corporate client out of Spokane. I hadn't eaten since the morning before. My fingers trembled as I tried to type a reply to a simple email. I blinked, but the screen stayed blurry. My body felt both too heavy and too light, like I wasn't quite sitting in my own skin. Then the buzzing started, my ears filled with white noise. I reached for my water bottle, but knocked it over instead. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor. The ceiling above me twisted in and out of focus. I vaguely remember the sound of my front door being pushed open, probably the super checking after I didn't respond to his morning knock for the rent. I heard a voice shout, "Call 911! She's not responding!" I came to in the ambulance for a few seconds, just enough to catch a glimpse of the paramedics' kind eyes and hear the crinkling sound of plastic as they opened an IV pack. I tried to speak, but my mouth felt glued shut. Then blackness again. I drifted in and out at the hospital. I could hear the beeping of machines, the shuffle of nurses' shoes on polished tile. I remember someone brushing hair from my forehead and murmuring, "She's dehydrated. Stress-induced collapse. Poor thing." Then another voice, more distant. "She's been asking for her mother, but no one's come. We've called twice." When I finally woke properly, the light in the room was dim, filtered through those beige blinds every hospital insists on using. My throat was dry, my head throbbed. I blinked slowly, trying to get my bearings. A nurse walked in holding a tablet. "Good morning," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" Like I got run over by a bulldozer, I croaked. She smiled. That's not uncommon in your situation. You collapsed from exhaustion and severe dehydration. You've been here for almost a day. I nodded slowly. Anyone call my family? We did, she said, her tone careful. We spoke with your sister. She said they weren't available to come. I didn't respond right away. There wasn't much to say, just another item on the list. I turned my face toward the window and stared at the parking lot. My heart didn't break. It was already in pieces. It just settled deeper into the silence. After I was discharged 2 days later, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I asked the cab to take me to the community garden near downtown, the one with the wooden archway Vera had insisted on sponsoring last year. I remember how proud she had been of the photos that ran in the local paper. Look at that, she said, holding up the page. They even mentioned Celine by name. I hadn't been there since it opened. The place was quiet, the ground still damp from last night's rain. A few volunteers were pulling weeds near the far side. I wandered slowly through the rows of winter crops until I found the memorial section. It didn't take long. The plaque was bronze, gleaming under a recently polished finish. In loving memory of Thomas Callan, devoted husband, mentor, father, survived by his one true daughter, Celine. I read it 3 times, then a 4th. My lungs tightened, not from grief, but clarity. They'd rewritten the past, even the only part that had ever felt safe. My stepfather wasn't perfect, but he had been kind. He taught me how to check tire pressure, how to make chili from scratch, how to respect people even when they didn't earn it. He never raised his voice at me. He called me kiddo, and sometimes, when no one was around, he said, my girl. Not the other one, not oops. And now, even his memory had been scrubbed clean of me, like I'd never existed, like he'd only ever loved Celine. I stood there for a while, I don't know how long. Long enough for the sky to shift from cloudy to clear, long enough for my fingers to go cold. Then I whispered, to no one in particular, they buried me without a casket. And maybe they had. Maybe my mother had spent years digging a slow grave, not with a shovel, but with omission, with blank cakes and missing names and plaques that told lies. But not anymore. That afternoon, as the sun started to dip behind the trees, I walked home slowly. Each step felt heavier, but clearer. The weight wasn't confusion anymore. It was resolve. When I got back to my apartment, I showered, changed into clean clothes, and sat at my small desk. I opened my laptop, I clicked on a blank document, and I began to write, not fiction, not exaggeration, but every detail I could remember. The contracts, the will, the hospital stay, the names, the way the nurse looked at me with pity, the way Vera didn't even ask if I was okay. They say grief comes in waves, but erasure comes in silence. And silence, that's what they were counting on. That night, my phone buzzed. A number I knew too well. Hi, Mom, I answered flatly. Her voice was calm, too calm. We need to talk. Just us. I said nothing. There's a trail I like out by Hayden Lake, she continued. Quiet, pretty. Thought we could walk it. Just you and me. I stared at the wall across from my desk. I'd been here before. Not this exact moment, but the feeling. That weight of suspicion sitting just heavy enough to make you question your instincts. Still, I said, sure. Because sometimes the only way to end a story is to walk into its final chapter. She picked me up around 4 that afternoon. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving, the kind of quiet, gray-skied day where most people were still living off leftover stuffing and pie. I didn't ask where we were going. She hadn't offered, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I sat in the passenger seat of her white SUV, buckled in, hands folded in my lap like a child waiting for a lecture. She wore a cranberry-colored coat and her favorite gloves, the suede ones with pearl buttons. Her lipstick matched the coat, always coordinated, always composed. The ride was silent for a while, except for the soft hum of classical music coming through the speakers. I recognized the song, Debussy's Clair de Lune. She used to play it during Sunday dinners, back when Dad was alive. That small, disarming detail almost made me relax. Almost. Thought you could use a breath of fresh air, she said eventually, her voice sugar smooth. You've been so tense lately. I glanced at her. I collapsed from stress and dehydration, Mom. She nodded like she hadn't heard me. Exactly. You need to reconnect. With nature. With your roots. We drove past the edge of town, where the trees grew thicker and houses gave way to cabins and long stretches of silence. The snow hadn't fully stuck yet, just dusted the shoulders of the road and clung to the low-hanging branches like white moss. Everything looked washed out. When she turned off the main highway onto a gravel road, I felt my chest tighten. I didn't say anything. I watched as the scenery blurred into deep woods and narrow trails. It had been years since I'd been out this way, but something about it scratched at my memory. Camping trips when I was little, chasing fireflies behind the old Callan property, the sound of my father's voice calling me back before it got too dark. The car rolled to a stop near a clearing. Vera cut the engine and looked at me. Come on, she said. It's not far, just a short trail. I hesitated. She didn't wait. She stepped out and started walking, boots crunching on frozen leaves. I followed. The air was sharp. My shoes weren't made for hiking. The path twisted between trees that leaned close together like they were whispering secrets about me. I kept pace behind her, watching the way her shoulders sat square, her head held high. She hadn't said anything meaningful since we left. About 10 minutes in, we reached a clearing I didn't remember, open, quiet, and unsettling. There were no birds, no wind, just the sound of our breaths. She stopped near a rotting log and turned around. For a moment, she just looked at me, not the way a mother looks at her child, but the way a prosecutor might look at a defendant. You know, she began, I tried. I really did. I stayed still. I tried to love you. I even convinced myself I could, if I just gave it enough time. But you were a burden from the start. I blinked. Excuse me? Her mouth twitched, not a smile, not a frown, something in between, something worse. You ruined my life the moment I saw that pregnancy test. You think I ever wanted another child? Especially after Thomas made it clear he'd only married me because of Celine? I swallowed hard. He loved me. He said I was his girl. She laughed, short and sharp. He said that to anyone who needed it. He was weak. That's why he died broke and ashamed. My stomach dropped. I wanted to step back, but my legs didn't move. I gave up everything for this family, she continued. My body, my reputation, and what do I get? A daughter who freelances out of a shoebox apartment and makes me look like a charity case? I felt something crack in my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was something quieter, something like the moment before a vase falls, still, suspended, inevitable. You could have helped. You could have made something of yourself. But no, you became dead weight. Dead weight I had to carry for 33 years. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She stepped closer, close enough for me to see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her mouth curled like she was tasting something sour. I should have aborted you. The words were flat, not screamed, not whispered, just dropped between us like a stone into deep water. You've been a slow death to my name, she added, to everything I built. I felt my knees go weak. Why? I asked. It came out thin, like air slipping through a crack in a window. She stepped back, looked down at me like I was a stain. Go meet the wolves, she muttered. Maybe they'll find some use for you. And then she turned. I didn't follow. I watched her walk away, back down the path, boots crunching against the earth, each step carrying her farther from me, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No hesitation, no backward glance. I stood there, stunned, until my legs gave out and I collapsed onto the frozen ground. The cold seeped through my jeans, into my skin, but I didn't feel it, not really. My breath came in short bursts. The forest was quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I knelt. I begged. But she never turned around. For a long time, I couldn't tell how long I'd been on my knees in the snow. My limbs felt numb, but not just from the cold. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years, quietly, like mold behind drywall. There was no sound but the rustle of dry leaves and the occasional creak of tree branches shifting in the wind. Even the birds had gone quiet. Eventually, my legs buckled completely and I collapsed to the forest floor. The snow wasn't thick yet, but it was enough to soak through my jeans and jacket within minutes. I tried to lift myself back up but couldn't feel my hands. Panic didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like the cold had, first in my fingers, then my chest, then my throat. I remember trying to call out, just once, "Mom," but my voice was hoarse, and the word barely made it past my lips. It felt stupid the second it left my mouth. That name didn't belong to the person who had walked away without flinching. I pulled my knees into my chest and tried to conserve warmth. My phone was dead. No flashlight, no water, no food. I had nothing but the clothes I wore and the certainty that she wasn't coming back. The sun vanished fast. The sky dimmed into a blue so dark it was almost purple. Then came the sounds I couldn't ignore. The distant, eerie howls that echoed off the trees, coyotes maybe, or something else. It didn't matter. Everything in me wanted to disappear, to melt into the snow and never feel again. But I didn't. I moved. Slowly, I crawled toward what looked like a break in the trees. A faint memory told me there might have been a service trail out here once, back when Dad used to take us hiking. My breath came out in clouds, each one shakier than the last. My vision swam. Trees spun. I couldn't tell if I was heading toward anything or just deeper into nowhere. I remember tripping over a root and falling hard against a rock. My head hit something, and for a moment, everything went black. The last thing I saw before the darkness took over was a flicker of headlights in the distance, two small orbs, like eyes, cutting through the trees. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't outside. The ceiling was white, the lights too bright. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the room. I was wrapped in warm blankets, an IV taped to my hand. My lips were dry. I turned my head slightly and saw a nurse adjusting something on a monitor nearby. She noticed me stirring and walked over, her expression soft. "Hey there," she said gently. "Welcome back." I tried to speak, but my throat ached. She offered me a sip of water through a straw. "You're in the emergency department at Coeur d'Alene Regional," she explained. "You were brought in early this morning by a man and his daughter. Found you curled up under a tree off a snowmobile trail. You're lucky they came when they did." I blinked. "What time is it?" "A little past 10. "You've been asleep for several hours. Do you—" I paused, gathering what was left of my voice. "Did you call my family?" The nurse's smile dimmed slightly. "We did. You listed Vera Callan as your emergency contact." I nodded weakly. "We spoke with her. She confirmed your identity, but said, and I'm quoting here, 'We don't have a daughter by that name.'" Then she hung up. The words landed like stones. I didn't cry, not right then. I just stared at the foot of the hospital bed, wondering how a voice could sound so calm while pushing you out of existence. "They said that?" I asked. She nodded. "I'm sorry." She was kind enough to stay a little longer, adjusted my blankets, said she'd bring me some broth soon. Later that day, the little girl who'd found me came by with her father. She couldn't come inside due to policy, but I saw her through the small window in the hallway. She waved, holding a pink thermos that looked too big for her hand. Her dad nodded politely, said, "Glad you're okay," and walked her back to the waiting area. When the nurse returned with a small tray of food, I asked, "Is there any paperwork I need to fill out, in case something happens?" She looked surprised. "You're stable now, but we can get you whatever forms you want." "I'd like to update my emergency contact and remove the previous one." Her expression tightened into something close to admiration. "Good call." That night, I didn't sleep much. Hospitals aren't made for rest, not when every beep and buzz jolts you out of thought. But even if it had been silent, my mind wouldn't have let me go. I lay staring at the tile ceiling, listening to my own heartbeat on the monitor, thinking of all the ways people kill each other without touching a weapon. My mother hadn't raised a hand, hadn't shouted, but she had left me to die in the woods and then told the world I didn't exist. They didn't kill me. They just made sure no one would claim me. That's when I realized the worst kind of abandonment isn't being left behind. It's being denied after the fact, like your existence was just an inconvenience. I stared at the IV drip, letting the silence of the room wrap around me like gauze. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done being scared. I had spent most of my life trying to earn love from someone who was never going to offer it, trying to belong to a family that had drawn a line in the sand and left me on the wrong side of it. But I was alive. That meant something. I gripped the edge of the blanket and whispered to myself, not a promise, not a prayer, but a statement of fact. I didn't know it then, but that day was the last day they would ever control the story. I left the hospital with a paper bag of prescriptions and a fresh layer of scars no scan could show. It was early December by then, cold, gray, and dry. There was a bite to the air that cut through even the thickest sweater, but I walked home from the clinic anyway. I needed to feel the weight of every step on the pavement. I needed to know I was still here. Back in my apartment, everything felt smaller than I remembered. The furniture sat where I left it. The faint scent of lavender still clung to the hallway from the neighbor's diffuser. I stood inside the doorway for a full minute before I finally moved. My phone, my laptop, my yellow legal pad, still untouched on the desk, waiting for the next entry. But before any of that, I went to the hall closet. In the corner sat a red plastic bin labeled Camping, Dad's. I hadn't touched it in years. I popped the lid and dug through the mismatched gear. An old flashlight that probably didn't work, a compass with no chain, waterproof matches in a rusted tin. And there, at the very bottom, was what I was looking for. My old smartwatch. I held it like it was made of gold. I'd worn it that day. I remembered charging it 2 nights before the hike, using it to track steps and heart rate, just a habit I'd kept from my gym days. I hadn't turned it off. Maybe, just maybe. I plugged it in and waited. The screen lit up with a soft glow. The file popped up seconds later, automatically saved from voice activation. Audio. 57 minutes. I pressed play. At first it was wind, branches, boots crunching over leaves. Then my voice, asking where we were going. Vera's answer, vague, upbeat. We walked for several minutes in silence before her tone shifted, and then, there it was. You ruined my life the moment I saw that pregnancy test. I should have aborted you. Go meet the wolves. I closed my eyes and listened all the way through. Every word, every breath. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Not this time. When the recording ended, I uploaded the file to my cloud storage. Then I copied it to an external hard drive. Then another copy to a flash drive I mailed to my old classmate Will, who now worked as a digital forensic consultant out of Portland. I added a sticky note inside the package. Hold on to this, I'll explain later. It wasn't just protection, it was insurance. It was proof. For years, my word had never been enough. But this was different. 2 nights later, I stayed up late sorting through a bin of USB drives. I'd been cleaning out my desk drawers when I found one marked Celine, Media. It was from a project we worked on years ago, something about updating the flower shop's website. I clicked through, expecting old logo drafts and invoices. Instead, I found a video file, unlabeled, no date. I played it. The frame was shaky at first, clearly recorded from someone's phone left sitting on the kitchen counter. It showed Celine and Vera at the table, half-full wine glasses between them. The lighting was dim, but their voices were clear. She's always been the mistake, Celine said, swirling her glass. We just need her out for good. Make it clean. Vera didn't argue. She just nodded. She won't push back, she said. She never has. I watched the video twice. The second time, I noticed the timestamp in the corner. It was the night before she invited me into the woods. There it was, conspiracy on tape. Not just cruelty, not just indifference, intent. I sat back in my chair and let the weight of it settle. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I finally typed out a name. Ben Mathers. He was a former client. I'd helped him recover corrupted drives for a court case a few years back. In return, he'd told me if I ever needed a bulldog with a law license, he was a phone call away. I sent him a message that night. I didn't attach any files, just a brief line. Ben, I have something big, and I think I need a lawyer now. He replied in under an hour. Come by the office tomorrow. Bring everything. The next morning, I dressed in jeans and a blazer, something halfway between casual and ready for war. I met him at a small office off Main Street. Ben was in his 50s, sharp-eyed with a voice like gravel. He shook my hand firmly and listened without interrupting as I laid it all out. The audio, the video, the hospital report, the will, the financial documents, everything. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Maris, this isn't just a toxic family story. This is deliberate endangerment, financial coercion, reputational defamation, and, depending how we argue it, attempted murder. I exhaled slowly. So I'm not crazy. He shook his head. You're sane. You're thorough. And you're sitting on a case that'll knock the breath out of any judge with a conscience. I handed him the drives. You can do something with this? Oh, I can do a lot more than something, he said. But you need to decide. Do you want revenge or do you want justice? Both, I said. In that order. He grinned. Fair enough. That night, I went home and started building my own timeline, not just of what had been done to me, but how they did it, who said what, when, the lies, the transactions, the smears. I sat at my laptop with a mug of coffee gone cold and typed for hours. When I finally paused, I scrolled up and looked at the title I'd given the document. Statement of Events, Vega versus Callan. I saved the file in 3 places. Then I sat back and whispered to the silence. Let's see them explain this one away. I didn't send everything at once. That would have been too easy and too reckless. I sent Ben the forest audio first, then the kitchen video, then the receipts. Every file had a name, a date, a timestamp. I backed up each one to the cloud and burned copies onto separate drives. I had learned my lesson about trusting people, even those who used to share my last name. Ben called me 2 days later. His voice was even tighter than usual. This isn't a case, he said. It's a full-on war. Are you ready for what comes next? I've been ready, I told him. They're the ones who never thought I'd fight back. The suit was filed that same week. Vega versus Callan, civil liability, emotional distress, financial coercion, attempted endangerment. It wasn't just about proving what they'd done. It was about stripping away the mask they wore in public, in our church, on social media. I didn't want revenge for the sake of it. I wanted clarity. I wanted witnesses. While Ben prepared the legal case, I kept digging. One night, while going through old emails, I found something I hadn't noticed before, a folder labeled Therapy Docs. It was from Vera's Gmail account, forwarded to Celine. Curious, I opened the PDF. It was a mock-up of a psychological evaluation. The letterhead looked official, but something about it felt off. The language was cold, clinical. It listed me as emotionally unstable, exhibiting signs of paranoid delusion and self-victimization. I stared at it for nearly a full minute before my eyes found the signature, Dr. Miriam Hensley. Only, I'd met Dr. Hensley once. She wasn't a doctor, she was Vera's bridge partner, a retired school counselor with no medical license. I called Ben right away. That's felony territory, he muttered. Forgery, medical misrepresentation, intent to manipulate guardianship status. She was building a paper trail to get you committed, Maris. My hand tightened around the phone. She wanted me out of the picture completely. Ben's voice dropped. Then we'll make sure the picture shifts. 3 days later, on a bright but bitterly cold Monday, I walked into the courthouse in Coeur d'Alene. My coat barely kept out the wind, but my spine stayed straight. Inside, the clerk handed me a numbered badge and gestured to the row of benches. Celine was already there, heels too high for a courtroom, lips pursed in a shade that tried too hard. She looked up, saw me, and her mouth twitched. You really going through with this? She said, like we were discussing a brunch reservation. You faked a medical record and left me to die in the woods, I replied. Yeah, I am, she huffed. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. A few seats down, a local reporter from the Core Voice scribbled notes. He'd gotten wind of the story, maybe from the leak Ben authorized to get ahead of the spin. When Vera finally walked in, flanked by her attorney, the room shifted. She still had that rigid posture, that subtle smirk she wore like armor, but there was a tightness around her mouth I hadn't seen before. For the first time, she looked human. Cornered. The hearing was brief, just a preliminary review, but it was enough. Ben stood with confidence, voice calm, documents in hand. He outlined the timeline, the financial trap, the video evidence, the abandoned emergency call. He cited the hospital's report, the therapist fraud, the audio from the forest. Vera's attorney argued it was a family misunderstanding. Emotionally charged, he said, poorly communicated. Celine's lawyer blamed my mental fragility. And then, as Ben queued up the recording, the room fell silent. Vera's voice came through the speakers clear as a bell. I should have aborted you. You've been a slow death to my name. Go meet the wolves. Even the judge's eyebrows lifted. One woman in the back gasped. By the time the session adjourned, the entire courtroom knew. It wasn't just neglect, it was orchestration. Outside, the press was waiting. I didn't speak, but Ben did. We are pursuing justice. What was done to my client is not a private matter, it's a public warning. That night, the story hit the local news cycle. Idaho family scandal. Daughter claims orchestrated abandonment and fraud. Photos of Celine's podcast cover were side by side with court documents. Vera's florist shop was listed in the headline, Callan Blooms Under Fire. The comments section exploded. I stayed offline for the first few hours. Then, when I finally looked, I saw messages from strangers, survivors, women who'd been gaslighted by parents, manipulated by siblings, disbelieved by everyone. And I realized I wasn't alone. The fallout came quickly. Vera's accounts were frozen by court order. Her suppliers canceled contracts. She showed up to the shop on Thursday and found protest signs outside. Abandonment is abuse. Believe daughters. Celine's sponsors, wellness brands, beauty lines, began dropping her one by one. One posted a public statement. We do not support individuals under active investigation for domestic endangerment. She tried to post an apology video, tears and all, but the comment section wasn't buying it. You said she was crazy, someone wrote. Turns out she was the only one telling the truth. I watched all of it unfold from my living room, feet tucked beneath me on the couch, a hot mug of tea in my hands. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just uploaded the truth and let it speak louder than I ever could. The headlines were still fresh when I stepped back into the courthouse that Thursday. I had slept no more than 4 hours, my brain buzzing with noise, tension, a strange kind of anticipation. Not fear, not even anger, just a quiet readiness. I was no longer someone asking to be heard. I was someone handing the world the receipts. The courtroom was already buzzing with spectators and press when I arrived. Ben met me at the door, gave a small nod, and led me past the whispers, the stares. I noticed a few people from our church, 2 former classmates from high school, and someone who used to be a florist wholesaler for my mother's shop. Their eyes followed me, not with pity, but with curiosity, with a hunger for answers. Inside, Vera sat stiffly beside her lawyer. She wore a dark gray suit jacket and pearls, like she was about to host a charity luncheon. She didn't look at me. Neither did Celine, though her posture was different, tighter, less composed. Her usually perfect bun had loose strands around her face, and her lipstick was slightly smudged. Ben leaned toward me and whispered, "Ready?" I nodded. "Let's finish it." We didn't speak during the first hour. The judge reviewed preliminary documentation, court orders, and motions. When it was time for my statement, I stood slowly, my legs steadier than I expected. The courtroom hushed as I approached the stand. I'd like to begin by submitting audio and visual evidence, I said. The clerk received the drive Ben handed her. A moment later, the first clip played. It started with boots crunching in snow, faint wind, my voice asking a question, then Vera's cold, unmistakable tone. Go meet the wolves. The entire courtroom went still. I kept my eyes forward, watching not the screen, but the faces in the room. The judge looked concerned. 2 jurors leaned forward. One covered her mouth with her hand. Next came the video. Vera and Celine in the kitchen, wine glasses on the table, laughter turning venomous. She's always been the mistake, Celine said, eyes shining with contempt. We just need her out for good. She won't fight, Vera replied. She never has. Until now. The final exhibit was the bank trail, the false fraud claim Celine filed to freeze my funds days after the lawsuit became public. The text message from Vera. The pattern was too tight, too coordinated to ignore. When I stepped down, the silence in the room stretched long enough to feel physical. The judge finally turned to Vera. Ms. Callan, would you like to respond? Her attorney stood, flustered, papers in hand. Your Honor, we would like to contest the admissibility of— Save it, the judge said firmly. Ms. Callan? Vera stood. Her voice was clipped, barely above a whisper. Everything's been taken out of context. The judge raised an eyebrow. You told your daughter to meet the wolves. What context were you referring to? She faltered. Celine reached for her mother's hand, but Vera didn't take it. Her eyes were distant, like she was reading a script and just realized she was in the wrong scene. It wasn't supposed to go this far, Celine blurted, breaking the silence. We were trying to protect the family name. Ben stood. By erasing a family member? Neither of them answered. The judge banged the gavel lightly. This court will continue deliberation on damages. But let me be clear. If this were criminal court, the charges would be serious. The hearing ended. I stood as the room began to clear, flashes from cameras reflecting off the polished wood panels. Reporters crowded the hallway. I didn't stop. I walked through them, down the steps, past the news vans, and into the cold December afternoon. It was dusk by the time I made it back to the old neighborhood. I hadn't been back to the house since everything began. It sat quiet now. Lights off, blinds drawn, a realtor's sign tilted slightly on the lawn. The shop was closed indefinitely, their reputations, their assets, crumbling. But the house, it still stood. I stood across the street, looking at the porch where I used to sit during summer storms, where I once braided Celine's hair when she was too busy with schoolwork to brush it herself. Where Vera gave me a birthday gift once, just once, that wasn't a recycled gift bag or a bottle of lotion she got on sale. Everything had happened here. And yet, none of it lived in the walls anymore. It wasn't mine, not really, but I could finally see it for what it was. A shell. A place where a story once went wrong. Not a prison, not a monument. Just wood, nails, and memories. This house used to be a cage, I whispered to the wind. Now it's just empty. I turned and walked away, not out of sadness, but because I had more important places to be. I had people to help, people like me, because the story should have ended there, with a verdict, a victory, a moment of vindication. But healing doesn't come with a gavel. It comes with what you do next. The air inside the Callan house was stale, like the walls hadn't breathed in weeks. I moved through each room slowly, letting the silence stretch, my fingers grazing door frames, shelves, paint-chipped corners of furniture I once dusted every Sunday, while Vera sipped her tea and reminded me that cleanliness reflects character. The sun filtered through half-open blinds in the living room, catching on the floorboards Dad had installed when I was 12. I paused there, barefoot on wood, older than my adult self, feeling the memory press into my soles. A home should feel familiar. This one felt like a museum of a life I never got to live. But I wasn't there to reclaim the past. I was there to repurpose it. 2 weeks had passed since the court ruled in my favor. Vera's accounts were seized. Celine's podcast sponsors had all but evaporated, and the town's whispers had turned into headlines. I hadn't celebrated. I hadn't thrown a party or opened champagne. That wasn't the point. Winning was never about punishment. It was about space. Finally, space to breathe, to rebuild. I bought the house at auction. It wasn't expensive. Trauma-laced property rarely is. Neighbors whispered about it. Why would she want that place back? Isn't that where it all happened? Must be some kind of statement. It was. I spent the first 3 days cleaning it myself. No staff, no contractors, just me, a pair of gloves, and enough lemon-scented disinfectant to erase years of coldness from every surface. It was exhausting. It was sacred. The following week, a new sign went up on the front lawn. The Vega House, Women's Resource Recovery Center. We painted the inside soft beige and pale blue. Calming. I replaced the family photos with framed quotes from survivors, letters of strength written by women who had escaped people who called themselves family. In the main hallway, we hung a mirror, not to reflect beauty, but to remind every woman who walked in that she existed, that she was whole, even if the world told her otherwise. The kitchen became a shared space for workshops, legal literacy, resume building, trauma counseling. The living room became a lending library. Upstairs, we built out 2 temporary housing rooms for women and children in transition. No questions asked, no shame required. One afternoon, while rearranging pamphlets on the entry table, I found an envelope wedged between 2 stacks. No name, just my initials written in the corner in tight, angular handwriting. Inside was a letter. Maris, I did what I thought would keep this family strong. I see now what I actually did. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just hope you never repeat my mistakes. Vera. There was no return address, no signature beyond the scribbled name. I didn't frame it. I didn't rip it up. I folded it, slid it into a folder marked personal, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. Some things don't need burning or honoring. They just need to be kept where they belong, quiet and out of sight. A few days later, we opened officially. I wore jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy. No ribbon-cutting ceremony, no big press release, just a note on the town board, a few flyers at the grocery store, and a front door left unlocked. Our first visitor arrived just after 10 in the morning. A girl, maybe 14, maybe older. It was hard to tell under the layers of oversized clothing. She had a bruise blooming beneath her eye and a backpack that looked heavier than she was. She didn't say her name. I didn't ask. I just opened the door a little wider and said, "You're not alone. That's what matters now." She came in, and I closed the door gently behind her. Later that night, I took a walk by the lake. The same lake I'd wandered months earlier, just after Vera's birthday party, when I'd questioned whether I'd even be missed if I vanished. That version of me felt like a ghost now, still real, but distant. A flicker of who I had been before I learned that survival isn't just staying alive. It's choosing who you become afterward. I stood at the edge of the water as the wind picked up, rippling across the surface in soft, steady waves. My reflection stared back, older, wiser, not healed, but whole, in a way I never thought possible. I thought about everything, the contracts, the lies, the snow, the silence in the hospital, the whisper of that little girl in the woods who thought I was an angel, and I thought about Vera. Some people would ask if I forgave her. I didn't. But I wasn't carrying her anymore either. I was carrying the women who walked through the door of the Vega house. I was carrying the girl who had no name but knew how to survive. I was carrying the version of myself who had knelt in the forest and begged, and who had risen not because someone offered a hand, but because she built her own. My mother dragged me into the woods to end me, but she didn't realize wolves don't eat their own. They raise them to survive. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most. But healing isn't about waiting for an apology. It's about reclaiming your voice when they tried to silence it. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? If this story moved you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true-life stories like this one. Your next favorite revenge story might be closer than you think.